Thank you, Vincent, for the kind introduction. So today I'm here to help you understand how to appreciate contemporary art. So we'll begin right away. Nowadays, if you walk into contemporary art museums or galleries, it's not always easy to understand what's going on. And so many people come up to me and tell me that they actually get intimidated when they walk into galleries. So it's I guess an issue everyone faces. And today I want to help you sort of get a better idea of what contemporary art is, so that next time you walk into a gallery, it's a little bit easier for you. But before we start to go into how to understand contemporary art, I think it's important for us to know why we have to know how to understand contemporary art. And in order to do so, I think it's better if we start by looking at contemporary art market in the first place. So contemporary art market is among the many segments in arts. And what's interesting is contemporary art is the segment that has experienced the most tremendous growth in the 21st century. From 2000 to 2017 alone, contemporary art market size grew by 14 times. And if you want to know what the size of the market is, now it's at 14.8 billion Hong Kong dollars. Contemporary art market used to be a small portion of the total art market, but now it has risen to 17% of the art market, which tells us that it's a very important segment within arts. What's interesting about contemporary art market is that the top 25 artists are responsible for almost half of the post-war and contemporary art auction sales. And it's a good example of winner-takes-all market, where a very small portion of artists are responsible for a very large market share. And among the list of the most profitable 25 artists include, as you can see, Jean-Michel Basquiat and Andy Warhol, Cy Twombly, and other artists including Christopher Wool, Peter Doig, Mark Brochan. What's interesting about the list is that among the 25, there are 2 female artists, and those are Yayoi Kusama and Agnes Martin. So the results from public auctions show that transactions in the contemporary art segment is accelerating and becoming increasingly international. The supply of contemporary art is renewing. We're getting new content every day. And the population of collectors is growing. So it used to be in the old days, the very old, I guess, small group of wealthy people used to be art collectors, whereas now it would embrace a larger group of people. So that we see so many young collectors in the market, the new collectors who collect different sorts of art. And what's interesting is with the growth in the demand and the supply, the market is becoming more transparent, liquid. And liquidity is also a very important factor, because in order for the market to show growth, it needs ample liquidity. And we'll talk more about this later on. You see so many young celebrity collectors nowadays collecting contemporary art, and I think it has contributed to the general growth of the market. I'm not sure if you recognize this person, but he's a member of a K-pop boy band named Big Bang, and he's one of the most established young collectors in the art market today. in 2017 or 16, he actually collaborated with Sotheby's to be actually the first curator to co-work with an auction house to organize an auction. And those pieces featured in this auction were pieces by contemporary artists. And it was at the time there was a huge buzz in the market, and this actually led to many young collectors looking into contemporary art. Why is contemporary art so attractive? Why do people look at it? It's because one of the main reasons is the rapid price increase. Usually, sales of contemporary art, what happens is there's a period of intense collector enthusiasm, but afterwards, there are usually periods of hesitation. But over the recent, I think, months, this actually has been incorrect. And contemporary art has been the primary driver of the entire art market growth. Whereas for other segments, the growth was not as strong. And in the graph, I'm not sure if you can see, it's the individual prices of three distinguished contemporary artists, and you could see that maybe starting from 2013, the increase has been quite rapid. So among the contemporary artists, I think the one we hear about the most is the American artist, Jean-Michel Basquiat. And just last year, his work actually set a new record, not only for art made after 1980s, but for American art. This work is a 1982 untitled, and when the past owner acquired the piece in 1984, it was only about $20,000. But at New York Sotheby's, it was sold for $110 million US, just in 33 years. If we convert that into percentage, on average, it's a 30% return every year. But over 33 years, the price has gone up 5,300 times. And this piece was actually bought by a young Japanese collector. His name is Meizawa. And he actually set the past record for the artist as well. So, you could see that just last year, Leonardo da Vinci's Savior was sold for about, I think, 400 million. So this is already price-wise, although this is by an artist in the 70s, 80s, the price is almost 25-30% of the most expensive art. So now that we know the reasons why we should be looking at contemporary art, let's start to get into understanding what contemporary art is. So whenever I start to look at a term, I always research the meaning of the term in the dictionary. So this is the definition of contemporary when you look up Merriam-Webster dictionary. It's an adjective, and it means marked by characteristics of the present period, meaning today. So it's actually the same word as modern or current. If you were to look up, contemporary something on the internet, these are the images you will find. For example, if you look up contemporary dance, you will find these very modern looking, jazz type of dances. And then you hear this thing about contemporary design all the time. This is sort of similar to what we see every day in the stores, houses, modern apartments. Next is a bit, I guess, interesting. It's actually a music score by a well-known contemporary artist and musician and composer, Heinz Holling. It looks quite different from what we've seen. So we could see that contemporary can mean a lot of things, not only modern today, but something different, right? So then what is contemporary art? Well, contemporary art by definition is art, namely painting, sculptures, photography, installation, performance, and video art produced today in this era. But the problem with that is, of course, contemporary can vary with the age of the person, right? If you're, let's say, 95 years old, there's a certain amount of overlap between contemporary and modern. So, so you need more specific idea as to what contemporary is. And I think the easiest way of defining contemporary art is by comparing it with modern art. So if you were to compare the two, the periods, there are many debates as to what the periods are, but this is general guidelines. So modern art is considered art from 1860s to mid-1900s. Contemporary art is considered to be art from 1960s to present. And the first art that is considered as a piece of modern art was Edouard Manet's Luncheon on the Grass, which we'll look at later. And for contemporary art, this was actually done in 1917 by an American artist, but it's called Fountain by Marcel Duchamp. Characteristic of modern art, for example, is it rejected traditional perspectives and subject matter. Whereas for contemporary art, it moved forward, and it's actually interested more in the concept behind the art. And another interesting key factor is that viewers' perception or impression of the art is also considered important. So basically, within modern art, Impressionism, Cubism, Surrealism, Abstract Expressionism is all considered modern art. For contemporary art, I think there is no definition. It's very difficult to define, but if we have to include, I would say, pop art, minimalism, conceptual art, performance art, any art that embraces technology. So let's look at the two pieces that each mark the beginning of modern art and contemporary art. So many historians say that Edouard Manet was the first modern artist. Specifically, this painting from 1863, which is titled Luncheon on the Grass. To us today, it might just seem like any other painting, but if you look closely, this piece didn't really try to portray the scene in a way that looked real, and it's not very three-dimensional. For example, if you look at the figures, each figures look as if they're sitting on top of each other. And the woman bathing in the back seems to be hovering over the other characters as though she could fall off to any of the characters if she wanted to. And also there's lack of shading between light and darkness, and the fact that he portrayed prostitutes at the time was considered rather radical. And at the time, people found this piece very shocking. That's why we usually say that this was considered the first modern art. So moving on to the first contemporary art piece. This is actually a porcelain urinal, and it's rotated 90 degrees. This piece was done in 1917, but this was in the time when modern art was everything. So when Duchamp submitted this piece for an exhibition titled Exhibition for the Society of Independent Art, it was a huge shock to everyone. It was criticized widely, but the fact that why this is considered the first contemporary art piece is the artist chose an ordinary article of life. He placed it so that the useful significance of this piece disappeared under new title and point of view. So it created a new thought for the art. That's why it's considered the very first contemporary art piece. So another, I guess easier way to look at this definition by the sociologist, she would say that there are two different paradigms. Modern art challenges like the conventions of representation, techniques, whereas contemporary art challenges the very notion of artwork. So usually, when you go to see contemporary art in galleries, I hear people saying things like, oh, my 4-year-old can draw this, right? But I think, funnily enough, this is where a lot of contemporary artists want to go with their work. This means people questioning their work is actually a proof that the artist is doing his job in a correct way. Contemporary art, I think, always challenges the concept of aesthetics. And aesthetics is the philosophical inquiry into what makes something art. So, when you look at a pile of bricks, urinal, trash in an art gallery, the artists are actually trying to make us question whether or not their work is art. As mentioned earlier, for contemporary art, viewers' impression is also part of the whole process. So for me, I consider contemporary art more interactive than any other art segments. So contemporary artists, and their working environment is quite different. They work in a globally influenced, culturally diverse, and technologically advanced world. So their art is a dynamic combination of thoughts, materials, methods, and I think contemporary art lacks uniformity, no organizing principles. It has much more room, and that's why we think it's more important. It's just like our society. It's a diverse society that would embrace different types of people, lifestyles, and that's why we like it so much. So now I want to go talk about different types of contemporary art. First is actually the easiest, I think, is pop art. Pop art was pioneered by artists like Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, and it was defined by an interest in portraying mass culture. And this was new at the time. It lasts roughly from the 50s to 70s, but I would personally say 60s was the peak. Now artists like Jeff Koons, they do what is called new pop. So, if you've ever seen Andy Warhol's Canvas Suit, Cans, or Marilyn, series, you've already seen pop art. It turned popular figures into brand images into viral works, and this was very new, very modern. And instead of people drawing landscapes, these popular culture and its figures were taken as sources and inspiration for art. Next is minimalism. Minimalism began in New York during the early 1960s, and the idea was to use simple shapes and forms for both paintings and sculptures. So instead of artists giving you a vivid image of what you should have in mind, viewers could use their imaginations to get the mind of the artist and figure out the message in the artwork. So the artists tried their best to refrain from putting any identifying features in their works. And artists such as Frank Stella, Donald Judd are classified as minimalists. And Frank Stella would always say, what you see is what you see. So the artist wouldn't willingly let you think beyond what you can see. So that's the point of minimalism. It's actually an important concept and conceptual in contemporary art today. Next is conceptual art. I think conceptual art can mean anything, but it's art for which the idea or the concept behind the artwork is more important than the finished art object. It emerged in the 60s, and it refers to art actually made up to this day. And it was, at the time, it was an experimental movement, but now it's one of the most important factors that you must consider when you're looking at contemporary art. So conceptual artists such as Damien, Hirst, Weiwei, Jenny Holzer are most important figures in contemporary art. Next, I think the most trendiest among the contemporary art nowadays is street art. And street art is actually, it was not considered mainstream, but now I think it has changed. Street art has become the most, I guess, attractive, the most sought after art in the market. Artists who were active in urban environment have actually moved forward to become commercial artists. And this actually happened mostly in the 80s, when everything that was considered subculture, such as hip hop, for example, became mainstream culture. So artists such as Banksy, Basquiat, and Kaws are considered street artists. Next is actually technology. Many artists nowadays embrace new technological advances, and they use it in various ways to improve and expand their skills. So photography, digital media have become a big part of the artist's process. Names like David Hockney, Peng Namjoon, Andy Warhol, Tom Wesselman are artists who were very experimental at the time and brave enough to incorporate these elements into their work. So now that we've reviewed the types of contemporary art, we can move on to talking about the actual artists. First is Jean-Michel Basquiat. He was an American street artist who was at the time considered as equal as Andy Warhol. I think the reason why he's not top much compared to Andy Warhol is because he passed away at the age of 27 because of drug addiction. His works are actually, they sell for the highest prices in the art market today. And because of his African Caribbean heritage and many, the fact that it reflects his many social problems at the time makes him a great artist. Moving on, I want to show you some images of his works. This, a short clip about the artist.
And just draw and crosshatch for hours from books, from objects, from memory, just words that were coming in from television or radio, something somebody said or something was mine, a poem. And that they received an enormous amount of work. Walking down the street, you're always seeing letters, hearing words, sounds. And it's like Jean had this way of putting them all together and achieving this odd sort of poignancy, this unexpected poignancy, I think. Just words in which he chose to put together, side by side, or cross one out, add another, drop a letter, change it, put it back, turn it around. It just came really naturally to him.
Stuff about postmodernism, I think that a lot of the clearest places that you can see it are in progressive jazz, rap music, hip hop music, and a lot of Jean-Michel's painting, and a lot of what went on in in graffiti, but Jean really put it together anyway. You know, these layers, where you can overthink something or do something else, there that you can see, which would make you think, wow, what was that? The whole cutting it up, just the whole scratching thing. We were like very, very aware, like the stuff that William Burroughs had did, like with those cut-up experiments and things like that, and we were able to see that, oh, this is connected to rap. A bit from here, a bit from there, all brought together to create something new and now, yet not forgetting history.
Apparent in all Jean-Michel's work is an encyclopedic range of visual and verbal reference. Each painting appears to represent a struggle for coherence and meaning in a cacophony of data. But a recurrent theme emerges, the theme of hidden stories, invisible people. Jean-Michel showed the faces, made the names of those countless millions who've been disregarded by history. Like the graffiti artist, but in a much more complex, multi-layered way, he said, I'm here, pay attention. Pay attention not only to me, but to all those millions whose history has been ignored. It became an increasing frustration to him that we established a place in the market, the critical and curatorial establishment kept its distance, treating it as an exotic.
As mentioned in the video, at the time he was considered exotic, but now he's the most highly valued artist in the market, and that's what makes contemporary art so interesting. So this was in 1982. It was sold at Christie's, and this is actually the second most expensive piece done by the artist. Next artist is it's David Hockney, who's an English painter, draftsman, printmaker, stage designer, photographer, and video artist. And he continues to challenge his styles and ways of working. And even at the age of 80, he still embraces. Oh, sorry, we'll talk about Damien Hirst first. Damien Hirst is, I think, you've probably all heard his names before. He's the richest British artist alive. He's well known for his, dead animals preserved in formaldehyde series and spot paintings. I think if you hear the name Damien Hirst, the first thing that comes up is this shark. It's actually a tiger shark that was preserved in formaldehyde, and at the time, it was criticized heavily because people thought it was against animal rights, and what is this? But if you look at the title, I think it makes a bit sense. It says, the physical impossibility of death in the mind of someone living. So I think last year, the Goshen did an exhibition of his series, and it's still, you see his iconic piece, wherever you visit world-class museums and contemporary galleries. Another well-known series by Damien Hirst is actually the spot paintings. And when you look at the spot, people ask, what this means. And if you look at the name, it's almost impossible to read. It's because what the artist did was, from the mid-'80s on to, I think, 2011, he produced roughly thousands of these pieces. And what's interesting about these pieces are they were either drawn by machines, or he had someone, one of his juniors, make it paint as if they were machines. And the different colors actually represents the different ingredients that would go into pills, like pharmaceuticals. And but the artist said what he wanted to do is he wanted to show perfect harmony among the various colors, because he thinks harmony is the best way to show beauty. So that's why the spot paintings became such an important piece in contemporary arts. Okay, another big name is Jeff Koons. He's an American artist. He turns like everyday fun objects into art. And he actually has a big studio. And basically the artist only comes up with the concept. He has his staffs build and execute the artwork. And he's always one of the most debated artists in the contemporary art scene. It's like you either love him or hate him. And he's well known for the balloon series. So this is okay. This is one of his world famous balloon dogs, and the reason why artists first came up with this concept is because he wanted to through art he wanted to show the greatest joy. And when the artist thought about greatest joy, it was a child's birthday party, because as a child he thought that was the happiest moment in his life. And whenever you go to those birthday parties, there are always these balloons, right? Or you would invite a clown to make these balloon animals for you, and that's where he came up with the idea. So now you see these balloon dogs everywhere, and it's still sought after all these years. Next is actually David Hockney, and as mentioned earlier, he's a British painter, draftsman, printmaker, photographer, video artist, and even at the age of 80, he still changes his ways and styles, and he embraces new technology. He's quite well known for using different technological devices. And what's interesting is he nowadays uses iPad or iPhone to draw his paintings, and then he has it printed out. So as you can see, in the left, this is drawn by iPad, and on the right is actually inkjet printed, and he uses Photoshop to modify his works. So, it's something new, but if you think about it, artists in the old times, whenever new technology or style came up, they also embraced it. But because technological advances were so slow, the changes were gradual. Whereas nowadays, it's like everything with technological advances are made every day, and artists are very good at adapting changes. Next artist is Julian Opie. He's a British visual artist known for his distinctive depictions of figure portraits and landscapes. And what's interesting is he observes things very closely, whether it's people or landscapes, but he would use simple colors, simple lines to actually portray the characters. But even with simple lines, what's interesting is the character of the subject is fully conveyed to the viewer. This is another short clip about the artist. Julian Opie is well known for using LED screens, and he actually does a lot of public art projects. So you see his art everywhere: New York, streets of Hong Kong, London, and Seoul. Another thing I want to mention is he was influenced greatly by Japanese woodblock prints and those ancient Egyptian paintings. So you see sort of elements in those in his works. The artist himself. I mean, this is the biggest difference between contemporary art and other segments of art. You know, artists in the old days, they had to be good at painting, and that was it. But nowadays, artists have to know what's going on in the society. They have to know the latest technologies. They have to figure out ways to differentiate themselves from the others. So it's not as easy as it seems. It takes a lot of effort, research, in order to do so, in order to be able to experiment into different areas and to get themselves established in the market, they often collaborate with different brands, commercial brands, and brands that are good at those are Murakami. We'll talk more about this when we talk about Kusama. Okay, next is Murakami Takashi. His show just opened Petter Street Building at Gagosian, so you can go check him out. He embraces cartoons and popular culture in his works, and it's very bright. It's very happy. It's very popular, and I think among the various nationalities, Japanese artists are quite influential in the contemporary market. And Murakami Takashi is one of those artists that actually stepped up the level for Japanese contemporary art. And what's interesting about this artist is that he would oftentimes include his character as an anime character in his works. And this was actually his collaboration with Louis Vuitton in the early 2000s. Another popular Japanese contemporary artist is Yoshitomo Nara. And he's considered among the neo-pop artists, like Jeff Koons. And he does this childlike characters. You can see like Nara's works on this wall as well. And these characters are inspired also by cartoon figures and popular cultures. What's interesting about his works is, although these childlike figures look very cute on the other hand, on the other side you sort of sense this sort of feel of, cynicism, and that, he says, is to portray the different sides of Japanese society and its people nowadays. His works are actually sold at very high prices in auctions, favorites of many auction houses, and he not only does paintings and sculptures. You see so many of his commercial products, like toy figures, radios, which are also quite popular. Next is Yayoi Kusama. She is the most, sought after female artist and considered one of the greatest 20th century artists. And she's very well known for the pumpkins, which is her iconic motive. There's another video about the artist. It's a short clip, which basically tells you what she has in mind whenever she paints. Last year, with the opening of the Yayoi Kusama Museum in Tokyo, her popularity has gone up even higher.
No longer are you the viewer the master. She's the master of infinity. She was not taken seriously by the establishment. Not only was she a woman, she was also Japanese.
Kusama was creating work of equal importance, yet she wasn't getting the same market.
It was a very difficult time for her. I became so depressed one day. So that my
mother had outrageous disrespect for Kusama's interest in art.
At some point she would have to escape.
Do you ever say, Keith?
Maybe on the first step, the long, difficult life of being a painter. Will you kindly show me the way?
Now, Keith gave her advice to come to the United States to bring her work with her.
So that she
was suffering from rejection of the art world, and she finds this hospital interested in art there, and she checks herself in.
Kusama was recognized for the 1993 Venice Biennial Pavilion.
She's celebrated all over the world. Her work transcends boundaries, and there's not one artist in the world who has that same audience.
The reason why Kusama is so loved everywhere is because she actually overcame her mental illness through her art. And the main message behind her work is love and peace. And also visually, it's very appealing. this is her iconic pumpkin, and it's very beautiful and intense. But Kusama insists that pumpkin was when she was a young girl and abused by her parents. This was the thing that gave her peace. So that's why we consider Kusama's especially yellow pumpkins, the most valuable. Next artist is Cindy Sherman. She's an American artist, and her work examines the woman's role throughout history in different societies. So it's actually photographs, self-portrait photographs. And it's open to interpretation, but they're usually considered feminism symbols. So she does a lot of photos from scenes of Alfred Hitchcock's horror movies, and also figures from important female figures from history. Okay, next is a Chinese artist. He's not only an artist, but he's an activist, and he cares a lot about human rights. He talks a lot about human rights violations, and he does a lot of. I think he's one of the most interesting artists. He smashes, ancient vases. His actions are very dramatic. He recognizes the fact that what's ideal and what's happening in Chinese society could be different. And what's interesting about the artist is he's one of the earliest Chinese conceptual artists to use social media, such as Instagram, as his media to show his art. So on the left is actually the artist throwing a Han Dynasty vase, and this is also an interesting piece titled Artist's Hand. Another artist that I wanted to talk about is actually a Korean artist, and his name is Do-HoSuh. And what's interesting about this artist is that he is able to work across various media. So it's not only drawings, videos, sculptural work, but basically he does things with space. And his works, he's interested in space, basically. So what he does is he recreates the features of his house, which I will show you in the video. So basically these are two of his works. One is the fabric sculpture series, and he recreates his old homes with using these fabrics. So we'll watch the video, and this is among his Karma series. It's done in sculptures, little figures, and also stitches on canvas.
Is a collection of work by Do-HoSuh that explores the nature of human home. Do-HoSuh was born in Korea in 1962. Emma's home includes drawings, small-scale fabric sculptures that depict objects and appliances, and a sequence of large-scale immersive sculptures that represent different places that he lived throughout his life. In hallway in his apartment in New York, the hallway from his apartment in Berlin, where he lived in 2002, is blue. And the corridor from his childhood home in Seoul is blue. And that is a new work that will be seen for the first time in this exhibition. All of Do-HoSuh's work is handmade and hand-stitched. The craftsmanship is the result of years of training with great artisans. As much as the details are tangible, they're made out of this very sheer material, so they're almost dissolving in front of your eyes. And I always think of them as kind of like the experience of waking up and trying to capture a dream. I'm Sarah Newman, the James Dickey Curator of Contemporary Art at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and I'm curator of Do-HoSuh, Almost Time. This exhibition is a good fit for the American Art Museum because it takes a broad view of national identity and
Koonses and Weiwei's. Do-HoSuh's work reminds us that individual places really matter, and that as global as the modern world is, it's still anchored by tradition and culture.
Okay, only a few more to go. Next is Christopher Wu, who's an American artist. And he actually has incorporated issues surrounding post-conceptual ideas. And what's interesting about this artist is that it's not necessarily about the idea behind the work. He actually he pushes his medium forward. He uses aluminum, silk screens, varnish, paint rollers, stencils with industrial procedures, and he actually breaks the conventional rules or the conventional procedure of production, and he experiments with various ways of doing his art. His art was shown at Koons in the Brown Floor during Art Basel. So he's most famous for these letters series, and it's actually done aluminum, and also you could see like sort of abstract paintings on canvas. Another popular figure nowadays is George Condo, and he's considered the current day Picasso. And there are references to Picasso, Matisse, Twombly, but Kondo has, in fact, developed his own very significant style. And he first gained popularity in Europe. He's American, but now he's sought after in Asia as well. And I think that he might, in a few decades, become the next Picasso. So basically, it's about figures, and they are sort of distorted and twisted, but it's done in a way that it's very interesting, and it could actually make us think about the artist's intentions behind these works. Okay, last but not least is Kaws. He's an American-based artist who is, I think, at the time, most popular figure in the art scene. He worked in designs, graphic design for toys and clothing, and that's where he got his motives. And basically, we think, it could be considered fine art, but also at the time it could be considered commercial design. But in contemporary art, we think it doesn't really matter. So he was born in 1974, a relatively young artist. But I think we're very interested to see where he will go in the next few years. Among his works, you find these cute toy series, as well as prints or flat sort of type of work, which usually has parts of different animation characters, whether it's Snoopy or SpongeBob. So when you go to auctions these days, you will find so many of his pieces, and prices would just go up very rapidly. So basically, I think I spent some time talking about the concept of contemporary art and introducing you to several artists. And our gallery is located at each Koons, and what's interesting about where I work is we're an auction house, but we also have exhibitions, and we have an upcoming modern and contemporary art sale on the 1st of October. And I know it's a holiday, but if you're in town, please stop by. I think my colleagues have some small catalogs for you to look at, and you will find the names of few artists that you saw today in those textbooks. I hope I didn't rush. I'm willing to take any questions if you have any. I'm glad that I had a chance to talk in front of you about contemporary art. So thanks again, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you. Yes.
Well, although you are from an auction house, may I ask a question that apart from money, so we put aside money, don't look at the market, because there's a book saying structuring the modern market, okay, from Picasso's time. We know there has been a lot of mechanism to structure the market, okay? So people are doing a lot of things. Apart from money, what do you see being the most important thing? Artistic or aesthetic, as it is in the contemporary art, or maybe the direction forward?
It's an interesting question, and I have friends who are curators, scholars, and when I talk to them, we always have this discussion about how to look at art. Is it from a money perspective, or is it more? I personally think that there's a lot more to arts than money, but money shows that it's actually the value is recognized in number terms. But for contemporary art, I think there are two important things that you must look at, and one is it has to be something that people can relate to. So, for example, I don't remember the exact name of the museum, but this museum in Texas bought a huge rock from an artist. And it cost millions, and at the time it was very controversial because it was just a piece of rock moved from somewhere to the museum. I would not judge, but many people, even in art, argued since many people can't relate at all, it can't be a significant piece of contemporary art. So at least it has to be something that a group of people can relate to. Second, I think, is that it has to raise a new issue. If it's something that we've seen before, and if it's just a reproduction of an existing concept in a new way, I think it won't be considered as valuable. But if it makes us think a step more and makes us wander in ways that we've never done before, I think that's what makes contemporary art more interesting. So the first piece, why I brought this piece is, it was unconventional, right? And it challenged the notion of art. But the period where the whole big, era for contemporary art started was with pop arts, which was done in the 60s. So, there could be various arguments, if we have to, some people would say contemporary art started mid-20th century. So there could be conflicting views, but the general rule is, we think pop art as a whole group what marks the beginning of contemporary art. So, if you were to go talk to people, usually you would say pop art. But if you were to think about the original concept, I think it was Okay, thank you so much for your time.
You just mentioned that top 25 artists are already nominated in the second market. Of course, in a investment aspect, it's good to identify the very market short artists, but it already the price may be very high. So how do people identify some upcoming artists? What what's the technique or some tips or unique feature that can find the artist that is very good, have a good future, but because now there are a lot of different exhibitions and not a million of artists, it's very difficult to identify
It is a very important question. And to be honest with you, with contemporary art, there is price volatility. So at one time, it's thought after prices would go up. There is, of course, a possibility that it could rapidly go down. And like any other investments, higher the risk, higher the return, right? But when I talk to my clients and advise them on art investment, I say first you have to set a budget, and then you have to think about the investment period. So, for example, if you're buying any of the big names, when prices are going higher, I say go short term. Don't 3 to 6 months. Thinking about buying somewhere and selling at a different place. But let's say if you're going for the smaller names, I say for contemporary art, it's long term. Think 5-10 years, right? So that's the difference. But what's interesting about art market nowadays is regardless of the segment, the best piece by the artist, prices will soar. Just mediocre piece, might not even sell. So it's important that you go for a good quality piece because the market is very selective. Even the most expensive piece, prices will likely go up if the artist doesn't fall. So for example, the Basquiat piece that was sold for 110 million, when the auction started, the estimate was 16 million, but it went up twice. So for those pieces, prices could go up. But for pieces that are not so good, for pieces that does not have the iconic maybe symbols or ideas or concepts, prices might not go up. So for the big names, good piece, I would recommend you generally go short term. For smaller names, go long term. But to be honest with you, I think for each piece of art, strategy has to be a slightly different. And that's why I usually recommend people to go to auction house, talk to the specialists, go to galleries, talk to the directors. And these people are the experts, right? So they will give you a full guidance and advice on how to invest in individual pieces.
Are there any set parameters for judging a good contemporary art? Or is it just like a byproduct of a person's or a set of people's perspective? Like, is this issue new or is it already covered? Or are there some set parameters that you see that you say, okay, it meets these parameters, so it's good contemporary art?
I would say 3 things matter. First, it needs aesthetic value. So there has to be consensus among scholars, schools, columnists, critics saying that it's worthy of something. Second, there has to be players in the market like galleries, museums promoting the art and actually making people come see the artwork. It's very simple. There has to be, if there's supply, there has to be demand. So nowadays, the general public has to enjoy and like the art. That's why Kusama, Jeff Koons, Andy Warhol, all the big names and the most, recognized artists go high up in price. So it's not just one side. You have to consider all 3 sides, and the dynamics between the 3 is very important. So when you look at art, I recommend you go to galleries, museums, see what they're showing. Number 2, go to auctions and see which sells for high prices. And 3, search Instagram. Look for the artist names and look at what people think. If you see so many postings, people liking the art. If you have all 3 aspects, it means that it's worthy of something.
Any more questions? What are the major markets in terms of contemporary artwork production, collection, and sales? I mean, specifically, are we seeing more people like Weiwei from China? Are we seeing more wealthy collectors
for contemporary art, actually, the biggest market, one of the biggest market is Asia. So it's because we have both artists and collectors in this region who enjoy contemporary art. In the old days, it used to be New York, specific cities, New York, London, and it's still a big market, but I think the new and upcoming market is actually Asia. There are so many like young Asian collectors who are now looking into contemporary art, and whereas the older generation of Asian collectors focus more on like antiquities, traditional art, I think young collectors specifically like contemporary art. That's why so many contemporary galleries now want to have their space in Hong Kong, big cities, Shanghai, and that's one of the reasons why us, the auction house, opened our space here as well. So if you have any additional questions, please come up to me. I have my name card here, and if you could give me your card or email address, I will be happy to send you updates on art market and the events that we host. Okay, thank you so much. Have a good weekend and happy New Year. Awesome. Thank you.